In this video, we will learn how to use Express with files. So what we will do is we will create a set of REST APIs wherein the data comes from the file, and we will create a JSON file and use that to store the data and to serve these APIs. Using these files means that when we close the server and switch it on again, when we start the server again, the data remains there. So earlier when we had used Express, whenever we closed the server and started it again, the data got reset. So the first API we are creating is /server/reset data, and it will reset the data in the file. The file is students.json. So if the file is not there, it will create it, and if the file is there, it will reset the data in the file. So at the end of this API, we will have that file created in our system. So let's go ahead and create it. So here we have that data that we have been using, the student data.js, and we will be writing this data to the file. So let's start doing it. Let fs equal to require fs, and what's our file name? Let f name is equal to students.json. Now what do we need to create? app.get /server/reset data, comma function request, comma response. Now what do we need to do there? This students data that we are getting from this file, we need to write that into the file. So let us convert it into a string. Let data equal to json.stringify students data. Once we have gotten the string, the text, we can just write it to file fs.writeFile fname, comma data, comma if error, we can just say response dot status 404 dot send error. Else response dot send data in file is reset. So we have reset the data here, and note within the fs.writeFile, when we get the response of it in that callback function, that is where we are sending the response. So let's run this code. So we can just say node student server.js. Now to test it, what will we do? We will just go to our Postman and localhost. What do we want to call? We call /reset data. So let's reset data, and we have created data in file is reset. So we would have created the file. Next, what do we want to do? Now that our file is created, we can start serving the APIs. So get /server/students. So it will give us all the students. So let's implement that. So app.get /server/students function request, comma response. So now what do we need to do? We will need to read the file. So let's do that. fs.readFile. What file do we want to read? Fname utf8 is the format, and function say error, comma data. If we get an error, response dot status 404 dot send error. Else what do we need to do? This data is a string. We will need to convert it into a JSON. So let's do that. Let students array is equal to JSON dot parse data. And now that we have gotten the data, we can just send the JSON response.send students array. So this code should work for us. Let's test it. So localhost, and we get the details of all the students. So this is working fine. Next, what do we want to do? Get /server/student/:id. So the ID, the student whose ID has been specified, we want data for that student. So let's do that. So let me copy this code and let's see if we can modify that. So we get /:id. Now what do we do here? We read the file, and from the file we will get the let student is equal to students array dot find st such that st, what was the name of the field? It's id. st dot id is equal to id. That is what we need to do. So we will also need to get the id. Let id is equal to request dot params dot id, and it's a number, so let's put a plus here. And what do we need to send? We will send student. Now if this id did not exist, we can say if student response dot send student, else response dot status 404 dot send no student found. So this would be our code. So we read the file, and note again, within that callback function we are doing this because that is where we get the data. So now let's test it. So let's get say a student named number 5. So we get that. Let's get it, say somebody else 8, we get that. And let's give some, say 39. We know that does not exist, so we get a 404, no student found. Next, what do we want to do? Get /server/students/course/:name. So get the details of all the students who are in this course. So let's go ahead and do that. Let me copy this code. We will modify it. So it is /course/:name. So let's get the name. It's not a number, it's a string. So now that we have done it, let's just filter this array. Let arr1 is equal to students array dot filter st such that st dot, what's the name, course, st dot course is equal to name. And once we get the array, we can just send it response dot send arr1. So even if it's empty, that's also a decent response. It's a structured response, so that works for us. Let's restart the server. So let's run that API, test it, /course/say node. And now when we send it, we get all the students with node. If I send, say, JS, we get all the students with JS. If I send, say, Java, there are no students, we get an empty array. Next, what do we want to do? We want to use post. So post/server/students. So let's go ahead and implement the post. So app dot post /server/students function request comma response. So now what do we need to do? We will get the body from the post, and then what we will do? We will need to update our data. So how do we do that? So first let's get the body. Let body is equal to request dot body. So we have gotten our student. Now what would we need to do? We will need to read the file. So let's read the file. fs.readFile fname utf8 function data. Why are we reading the file? Because we will get the data, and in that we will update the JSON. We'll push the new student into the array and then write it back. So now that we have read the file, we can just say if error response dot status 404 dot send error. Else what do we need to do now? The standard thing, let's convert it into an array, a JSON. Let students array equal to JSON dot parse data. Once we have parsed it, what do we need to do? We will need to find its ID, something we had done similar. So the logic we had used was find the maximum ID and then put an ID plus 1. So let's get the max ID. Let's max ID is equal to students array dot reduce accumulated current goes to. If cur.id is greater than accumulated, it returns cur.id, else it returns accumulated. And we can initialize it with 0. So this will give us the max ID, and we can just say let new ID is equal to max ID plus 1. And once we have gotten it, we can create our new student. Let new student is equal to, we can spread this body that we got, and we can say ID is new ID. So standard code that we had used earlier. So we have now put the new student, we have gotten the new student details. Now we can just say students array dot push new student. So now the new student has been pushed in the array. Once we have pushed it, what do we need to do? We will need to write it. So we can just say fs.writeFile. And what do we need? F name, and we need the data as a string. So let's convert it. Let data1 is equal to JSON dot stringify students array. So we have now stringified it with the new student. Let's write it. Data1 comma function air. And what do we say here? If air response dot status 404 dot send the error, else we say, we can just say response dot send new student. So the student we added, we can just send it back. So that's our post. Let's go ahead and test it. Let's restart the server. So we need to do a post. That's our body will be type raw. It's a JSON. Now what all do we need there? Let's just go have a look. So we will need name, course, grade and city. Let's maybe copy one and we'll modify it. So we don't send the ID. And remember, when we are using Postman, we need to put quotes here. So let's do that. So that's our JSON, and let's maybe make the name say Catherine and the course as say React. Let's send it, and we have gotten an error. Let's see why we got an error. Unexpected token in JSON. So let's test our JSON. Did we make an error? Yes, there should have been no comma here. We again get an error. Let's see what the error is. UTF is not defined. So this should have been in quotes UTF-8. Let's restart the server and send it again. And now you can see we have gotten the student. So ID 23. And if we go to say now 23 here and fetch it, we will get this student. So we have done the post. Next, what do we want to do? Put. So put will update the student. It will take the JSON and the student specified by this ID. It will update it. So let's do that. So to do the put, I will just copy the code of the post and then modify it. /:ID. So we get the body and we get the ID. Let ID is equal to plus request dot params dot ID. Why a plus? Because it's a number. So once we have read the file, what do we need to do? So now what do we need to do? We need to find the index of the student with that ID. So let's do that. So let index equal to students array dot find index st such that st dot id is equal to id. So once we have found the index, what do we need to do? If index is greater than equal to 0, if this student exists, we need to create an updated student. So let updated student is equal to, one standard way to do it is we spread this students array index, the student that we found, and then we spread the body. So what will this do? It will update all those fields in students array, the index that we found, the old student, with the modified fields in the body that we got. Fields that we did not get, they come from the original JSON. So this JSON gets spread, then this JSON gets spread, and whatever fields here are modifying here, we get the modified values. Once we have done that, let's update our students array index equal to updated student. Once we have updated it, we'll need to write it to file. So let's convert it to a data now. A string is equal to JSON dot stringify students array. Once we have stringified it, what do we need to do? We'll just write it fs.writeFile fname comma data1 comma function array. If error response dot status 404 dot send the error. Else what do we send? Let's send the updated student. So this is our code. Now if index is not found, then what do we do? Else response dot status 404 dot send no student found. We did not find a student, so we have sent no student found. Let's run this code and let's go ahead and test it. So we need to do a put. Let's try and update the student we had put in, which was ID 23. So ID is 23. Body is JSON. And let's copy some of the values from there and modify it. So let's say the grade has become B and the city has become London. Let's send it. So we get those changes, and now if we get the student, we can see Catherine, grade B, and city London. Note, because we spread it, so the ID remains the same. If we say put it at say 26 where no student exists, so we should get that error, no student found, a 404. Next, what do we want to do? We want to delete the student whose ID has been given to us. So let's go ahead and implement it, and I will just copy the put code and we will modify it for the delete. So app.delete, and in a delete we don't get a body. So now what do we need to do? If we get the ID, then what do we need to do? We will need to splice it. So we can just say let deleted student is equal to students array dot splice index comma 1. So from the index we have spliced 1, so we get the deleted student. The student array has gotten modified, so rest remains the same, and we just send the deleted student. And if the ID was not found, we just get no student found. So again, in this case, we had to read the file so that we get the data, and then we wrote back if the file got modified, if we found a student and deleted it, we wrote back that file. Let's restart the server. And let's say call delete. Say let's maybe get a student first. So student ID 2, let's delete that, which is 10. So we have deleted 2. Now if we try and fetch it, we get no student found. If we try and delete the student again, we get no student found. So this is working fine. And if we now get all the students, we shouldn't find 2 there, which is 1 and 3, and then it goes. So this is how we are using now files. And note that these changes. So let's look at the last one, 23. So although we are restarting the server, we have restarted it so many times, we are getting this data that we had posted and then updated. Why? Because of the reason that it is now being written to a file. So it is now permanent in nature.